Under the sweeping skies of Wyoming's high prairie, where the wind carried with it the sting of dust and the fragrance of sage, a moment unfolded that would mark the beginning of a story whispered in hushed tones around ranch fires and remembered in the quiet hearts of those who had witnessed it. The land stretched endlessly, its horizon broken only by distant ridges and the skeletal remains of cottonwood trees that had stood centuries of storms, and in the fading gold of late afternoon sunlight, a scene of sudden violence erupted, almost surreal in its intensity. A zebra, not native to these lands but part of a traveling conservation effort, had wandered too close to a low thicket along the canyon edge, its striped hide stark against the ochre grasses, when from the brush a massive rattlesnake, thick-bodied and desperate, uncoiled and struck with ferocity born of survival. In an instant the snake's coils wrapped around the zebra's slender legs and chest, muscles tightening like iron bands, the beast hissing with venomous intent as the zebra shrieked, its cry raw and jagged, echoing across the empty plains like a warning. Dust rose in frantic clouds as hooves pounded the earth, the zebra struggling, thrashing, its eyes wide with terror, the snake anchoring itself with implacable strength. The sound of the struggle carried to a small group of onlookers, 3 people, a retired ranger named Elias Hart who had lived his life on this land, a young volunteer from a nearby wildlife center, and a rancher whose cattle grazed along the edges of the preserve. They froze, caught between awe and fear, unsure if they were witnessing nature's brutality or something more profound. But even as they debated stepping forward, another presence emerged, one that stilled the air itself, a buffalo bull, massive and regal, his chestnut coat glinting with the dying sun's fire, horns curved like crescent moons tipped in shadow, eyes dark pools of ancient knowing. He moved with deliberate power, each step sinking into the earth with a weight that seemed to echo the very heartbeat of the land. 2,000 pounds of muscle and will advanced toward the chaos, and instead of shying from the human figures nearby or the serpent's wild aggression, the buffalo pressed closer, nostrils flaring, hooves crushing sage stems with a sharp crack. Elias, seasoned though he was, felt his breath catch. This was not normal behavior, not the instinctive avoidance of man nor the distant grazing indifference he had seen all his life. No, this buffalo seemed drawn by purpose, eyes fixed not on the humans but on the struggling zebra, whose cries grew weaker as the snake's constriction tightened. The buffalo halted only feet away, his great head lowered, the air around him vibrating with the sound of his heavy breathing, the sharp scent of dust and animal musk mingling with the metallic tang of fear. The young volunteer whispered, voice trembling, he's not running. He's watching. And indeed, the buffalo did not charge, did not bellow in rage, but stood as though assessing, as if ancient wisdom guided his towering frame. Then, with a sudden motion, the great beast lunged forward, horn striking the ground near the serpent's coiled mass. The earth trembled with the force, dust exploding upward. The snake hissed furiously, rearing back in defense, but the buffalo did not retreat. Instead, he swung his horns again, precise, driving into the ground mere inches from the zebra's pinned side. The zebra bleated, eyes rolling, but its gaze flicked upward, locking for a moment with the buffalo's, as though some unspoken communication passed in that desperate instant. Elias could scarcely believe what he was seeing. This was no mindless attack, but deliberate intervention. The buffalo stomped, his hooves coming down with bone-shaking force, breaking the ground where the serpent tried to anchor itself. Again and again he pressed, not crushing the zebra in his fury but targeting the coils, loosening them. The snake writhed, its scales flashing like dark lightning, hissing loud enough to rattle the air, but the buffalo was relentless, each motion calculated. The humans watched, transfixed, none daring to move, for they knew they were witnessing something beyond their comprehension, an act that blurred the line between instinct and intention. With a final furious shake of his massive head, the buffalo hooked his horn beneath the serpent's thick body and flung it aside, sending the creature tumbling through the dust in a writhing arc before it slithered hastily back into the brush, defeated, its hiss fading into the gathering night. The zebra collapsed, sides heaving, legs trembling violently, its stripes matted with sweat and dirt. Yet as it lay there gasping, the buffalo did not turn away. He stepped closer, lowering his massive head until his muzzle nearly brushed the zebra's flank, exhaling a long, steady breath as though willing calm into the terrified creature. The rancher muttered a curse under his breath, unable to reconcile what he had seen, while the volunteer's eyes brimmed with tears. Elias, however, felt a stirring deep in his chest, a recognition of something sacred, something that spoke of an ancient covenant between man, beast, and land. He whispered, almost to himself, he saved it, he knew. The buffalo lingered, standing guard over the trembling zebra, his dark eyes reflecting both the fading light and something deeper, something Elias could not name. The prairie fell into silence, broken only by the zebra's labored breathing and the soft rumble of distant thunder rolling across the horizon. And in that silence, heavy with mystery and awe, the humans understood, this was no ordinary encounter, no random act of survival, but the beginning of a story that would ripple far beyond this lonely stretch of land, a story born of compassion carved into muscle and horn. And as lightning flickered in the distance, Elias felt an unshakable certainty that this buffalo was protecting more than the zebra, it was guarding a secret, one that would demand to be uncovered, a truth buried beneath centuries of wind and grass, waiting to change everything they thought they knew. The storm clouds that had been rolling along the horizon finally broke by dawn, drenching the prairie in a silvery curtain of rain that hissed against the sagebrush and painted the dry gullies into streams that flowed quick and brown, but even as the land soaked, the memory of what Elias Hart and the others had seen the previous evening burned with a clarity that no rain could wash away, for the buffalo's deliberate intervention with the zebra had been more than an oddity of nature, it had been an act with purpose, a living question carved into the skin of the world, demanding an answer, and so when Elias awoke in his cabin with the smell of wet earth drifting through the open window, he already knew he would return to the site to investigate further, driven not only by his long life of stewardship for the land but by the gnawing sense that something larger than himself had chosen him to bear witness. He gathered his old ranger's pack, slinging it over shoulders that still carried the strength of his youth though tempered now by years, and he loaded a field journal, binoculars, a camera, and a worn flask of coffee, then called the volunteer. Her name was Marin, a young biologist barely into her 20s whose passion for wildlife burned brighter than her caution, and the rancher, Calder, who despite his skepticism the night before had agreed to ride out with them, for though he mocked what he called their romantic notions of buffalo wisdom, his eyes had betrayed unease, and curiosity can pull even the most stubborn soul. Together they drove Elias's truck across the drenched prairie, tires crunching over gravel, windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm, the vast openness around them a palette of muted green and gray beneath the sullen sky. When they arrived at the canyon rim where the attack had taken place, the rain had eased into a drizzle, and the ground was littered with signs of the struggle, churned earth, hoofprints deep with panic, the faint impression of the serpent's body dragging toward the brush, and at the center of it all, the zebra, still alive, lying under the watchful presence of the buffalo. The sight stopped them cold. The zebra's sides rose and fell with exhausted rhythm, its hide streaked with mud but no longer trembling with fear, while the buffalo, the same massive bull with the crescent horns, stood close, as though he had not left all night, his coat slick from rain, steam rising faintly from his massive shoulders in the cool morning air. He lifted his head as they approached, not in aggression but in acknowledgement, his gaze sweeping over them with startling steadiness, and Elias felt again that prickle at the base of his neck, that unshakable certainty that this creature saw them not merely as intruders or threats but as participants in a larger moment. He stayed, Marin whispered, her voice catching. All night. He stayed with it. Calder spat into the wet earth, though his eyes did not leave the scene. Or maybe he was waiting to finish it off. Don't go assigning human motives where they don't belong. But even as he spoke, his voice lacked conviction, and Elias noticed how his hat trembled slightly in his hands. They edged closer, and Elias crouched to examine the zebra, murmuring low to soothe it as he checked for wounds. The serpent's coils had left deep impressions, bruises along the ribs, but the zebra's breathing was steady, its pulse strong. It's battered, but it'll live, Elias said, relief threading his tone. Marin knelt beside him, brushing mud gently from the animal's coat, her fingers lingering as though the contact itself might offer comfort. The buffalo, however, did not move to interfere, though his massive head lowered slightly, nostrils flaring, and Elias recognized the behavior from his decades of observation, protective vigilance, not for territory, not for a calf, but for this zebra, an alien creature on this land. That was the mystery that tightened around them all. Why? As if to punctuate the question, the buffalo emitted a deep rumble from his chest, a sound Elias had only heard mothers make to their calves, a vibration of reassurance, and the zebra's ears twitched, its eyes fluttering shut, trusting. "He's guarding it," Elias said aloud, unable to stop the words. Calder scoffed, though his voice cracked, "That's crazy talk." But Marin leaned forward, her eyes shining. "No, he is. Look at him. He's connected to it somehow." They stayed for hours, watching, documenting, Elias scribbling notes in his weathered journal while Marin snapped photographs, each image capturing the silent vigil of the buffalo, each detail layering a portrait of behavior that defied every expectation of wild instinct. Calder grew restless, pacing, muttering that they were wasting time, but even he could not bring himself to leave, tethered to the gravity of the scene. By afternoon, the clouds broke, shafts of sunlight spilling over the prairie, and with them came another revelation, faint tracks leading away from the zebra, small, delicate prints pressed into the mud, almost erased by the rain but still visible to Elias's trained eyes. He knelt, tracing the outline with his fingertip. "These aren't from the buffalo or the zebra," he murmured. Something else was here. Marin crouched beside him, squinting. "Deer? Antelope?" Elias shook his head. "No. These are different. Almost human." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap, and all three turned instinctively toward the buffalo, who shifted his weight, hooves pressing into the softened earth, as if acknowledging the discovery. Elias felt his pulse quicken. Human tracks, here, interwoven with the scene of an attack, a zebra that should not even exist on these prairies, and a buffalo that had acted like a guardian. The puzzle deepened, threads tightening into a knot that demanded unraveling. "What if he's protecting more than the zebra?" Marin asked softly. Elias stared at the great bull, whose eyes reflected the sun like molten amber. The thought unsettled him, but it also ignited a spark of certainty. They were standing on the edge of something profound, a story that reached beyond predator and prey, beyond the ordinary cycles of life and death on the land. The buffalo's behavior was not random, it was a message, a living testament to connection, compassion, and perhaps even intelligence that rivaled their own. As the afternoon waned and shadows stretched long, Elias closed his journal with a snap. "We need to follow those tracks," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decision. Calder bristled, but Elias silenced him with a glance. "Something happened here that we don't yet understand. And if this buffalo is showing us the way, we'd be fools to ignore it." The buffalo rumbled again, low and resonant, and turned his massive head toward the canyon, where the tracks led into a maze of stone and brush. The zebra stirred weakly but did not rise, and for a moment Elias thought the buffalo would not leave it. Yet after a long pause, the bull stepped forward, muscles rippling, and began to follow the trail. Elias, Marin, and even reluctant Calder fell in behind him, like pilgrims drawn into the orbit of something sacred. The wind rose again, carrying the scent of rain-washed earth and the promise of revelation, and as they descended into the canyon's shadows, Elias knew they were no longer just observers, they were part of the buffalo's story now, whether they understood it or not. And somewhere ahead, hidden in stone and silence, lay the truth the buffalo was guarding, a truth that would change everything. The buffalo's wounds had grown deeper with time, though he carried them like badges of survival, each scar marking a night survived, a day endured, a battle fought against predators that seemed endless, for the lions had not forgotten him and neither had the hunger in their eyes, but still the beast refused to surrender to the inevitability of their strength, instead moving slower now. His body weakened yet his spirit sharpened with a resilience that no claw or fang could break, and he chose. His steps carefully across the dry savanna, knowing the terrain, remembering the hidden streams, the shaded groves, and the trails of his ancestors, for within him there was not just a will to live but a memory of a line that had carried strength for generations, and he was determined not to be the last note in that unbroken song. And so when the lions came again in the dim light of dawn, their paws silent on the cracked ground, their breath carried faintly on the wind, he felt them before he saw them, and he turned his massive head, eyes burning with a defiance that made the lions hesitate, for this was no simple prey, this was a beast that had already denied death twice, and though they encircled him with the patience of creatures born to hunt, they knew that to approach him meant blood, and still he stood, sides heaving, nostrils flaring, his horns gleaming with dried blood from past battles. And he lowered his head not in surrender but in readiness, the earth beneath his hooves vibrating with the promise of violence, and the lions, cunning and cruel, split apart, their golden bodies gliding like shadows in the grass, two in front to distract, two circling behind, their movements almost invisible except to the eyes of the one who knew he was the target, and the buffalo waited until they came close enough that he could see the flicker of their tails, the twitch of their ears. And then he lunged forward with a surge of force that belied his wounded body, horns catching one lion off guard and throwing it into the dust, its scream tearing the air, but there was no time to relish the victory because the others leapt, claws raking his flank, teeth sinking into muscle, yet instead of collapsing he twisted violently, dragging one attacker along the ground, slamming it with his weight, his hooves pounding down with thunderous fury, and the pride broke for a moment, startled by the sheer refusal of this prey to submit, and though blood poured from new wounds staining the earth beneath him, the buffalo stood over the lion he had crushed, chest heaving, eyes wild, daring the others to try again, and the lions, their hunger tempered by fear, retreated into the tall grass, leaving their fallen behind, for even the king of hunters knows when the price of a kill is too steep, and so the buffalo remained, shaking but unbroken, his body a battlefield, his soul an unyielding flame, and as the sun rose higher, painting the sky in harsh light, he limped toward the distant water, every step a struggle, but every step a victory against those who had wanted his end, and the herds he passed watched in silence, calves pressed close to their mothers, old bulls bowing their heads slightly, for they saw in him a legend walking, a beast who had fought not for glory but for existence, and the savanna itself seemed to pause in acknowledgement of his will, for the buffalo had not only survived another day, he had carved his defiance into the very heart of the wild, a warning to predators and a lesson to all that sometimes the strongest power is not in speed or sharpness of tooth but in the relentless refusal to fall. And as night returned and the stars cast their cold light, the buffalo lay under the acacia trees, his breath heavy, his body trembling, yet his eyes still alive with fire, because he knew the lions would return again, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps the next week, but he also knew that until his final breath left him, he would not give them the satisfaction of an easy kill, for he was not just prey, he was the embodiment of resistance, and his story was still being written across the endless plains. The buffalo stood in the quiet clearing, its breath heavy and slow, its eyes dim with exhaustion yet still holding a spark of defiance, the ground beneath it worn from the constant pacing and shifting as the hours and days had blended into one another, each moment a battle for survival against the invisible weight pressing on its body and spirit. And though the sun rose and set above the forest canopy, painting the world in shades of gold, crimson, and pale blue, the buffalo's world remained caught in a cycle of pain, hunger, and stubborn endurance, for it was not simply surviving for itself but for something larger, something unseen yet felt in the rhythm of its heart that still beat strong despite the weariness, as if bound by some ancient promise to the land, the wind, and the herd it once knew, though no herd remained nearby to offer the safety of numbers or the warmth of companionship, only silence broken by the occasional cry of a bird or the distant rustle of predators. Watching from afar but unwilling to strike just yet, sensing that this prey was no easy target even in its weakened state, because the buffalo, scarred by battles with lions and struggles against the merciless sun, had become more than flesh and bone, it had become a symbol of unyielding will, a creature carved by hardship into something that refused to fall before time had stripped away every last ounce of strength, and so it stood, swaying yet immovable, carrying the memory of every step it had taken across rivers, plains, and storms, carrying the faces of calves it had once shielded, the warmth of grasslands beneath its hooves, the memory of rain cooling its hide after days of relentless heat, all of it locked deep in its spirit as fuel to keep going one breath longer, one heartbeat further, while the shadows of the forest lengthened and the night crept upon it again, bringing with it the chorus of nocturnal life, the insects humming and the owls calling, reminding the buffalo that life continued in countless forms around it, and perhaps in that reminder lay the strength to press forward, to lower its great head once more and take a step, though each step burned like fire in its muscles and each inhale cut like shards of glass, yet still it moved, slow and deliberate, dragging its heavy frame toward the faint scent of water carried on the wind, its instincts guiding it even as its vision blurred and its legs trembled, for the buffalo knew that to stop now would be to surrender, and surrender was not written in its blood, not after years of enduring the unforgiving trials of nature, not after escaping the claws of predators and the droughts that claimed the land, not after standing guard through storms that felled trees and tore the sky apart, and so it leaned into the ache, into the trembling, letting its willpower drag the body along when the body itself begged for rest, until finally the faint glimmer of a moonlit pool appeared through the thicket, and the buffalo, with the last of its strength, pushed forward, stumbling into the shallow edge where the cool water lapped against its legs, and lowered its head to drink, each swallow reviving some fading ember within it, each drop a reminder that it was still alive, still fighting, still unwilling to bow, and as the night deepened and the stars spread across the heavens like countless watching eyes, the buffalo stood half in the water, half on the earth, the great weight of exhaustion settling again but tempered by the satisfaction of another battle survived, another night endured, and though no one watched, though no herd gathered around to acknowledge its endurance, the forest itself seemed to hold its breath in reverence, the air heavy with an unspoken recognition that here stood a creature that embodied survival in its purest form, and when the dawn would rise once more, painting the sky with fire, the buffalo would lift its head again, scarred and weary but undefeated, because as long as one more breath could be drawn, as long as one more step could be taken, it would remain, carrying forward not only its own survival but the unbreakable spirit of all who refused to fall. The buffalo stood alone beneath the relentless sun, its massive body scarred from battles and its horns worn but still sharp, its breath heavy and visible in the dry air, and yet within those dark eyes burned a fire that no wound could extinguish, a fire born not of rage but of survival, a primal determination to endure where others would have fallen, and though the plain stretched endlessly with no visible salvation, the buffalo's hooves carried it forward with the rhythm of ancient memory, a rhythm tied to generations that had survived hunger, drought, predators, and the unseen cruelty of time, for this creature bore within its flesh the history of its kind, and with every step, the dust rose and swirled like ghosts of ancestors urging it on, whispering that the battle was not yet lost, that life, even in suffering, had meaning. And so the buffalo pressed toward the edge of the horizon where the faint smell of water teased its senses, though the path was fraught with hidden dangers. For lions still lingered in the shadows, watching, waiting, their golden eyes reflecting hunger and patience, but the buffalo knew the rhythm of the hunt, had felt it before when younger and stronger, had turned to face them in the night and driven them back with the fury of its charge, and though age weighed heavy on its bones, it carried within a wisdom the lions could not match, a wisdom that taught silence and timing, that taught how to move when the hunters grew careless, and so as the lion circled, the buffalo did not panic, it slowed, lowered its head, and let the dust cloak its scent, listening to the whisper of the grass as the wind shifted, betraying the predator's positions, and when the moment came, the buffalo did not fight as before but walked with unshaken steadiness, its sheer will confusing the hunters, its defiance shaking the rhythm of the chase, and though they followed, their paws pressed softer into the earth, for they sensed something unyielding in the beast before them, something that told them this was no easy prey, and still the buffalo moved, step after step, until the land shifted beneath its hooves into softer soil, a sign of water nearby, and its nostrils flared as the faint gleam of a hidden stream revealed itself among the rocks, and with a strength summoned from the deepest part of its being, the buffalo descended toward the water, the lions hesitating at the ridge, torn between instinct and caution, and as the buffalo drank, lowering its head into the cool reflection, it felt life surge back through its body, not enough to erase its pain but enough to remind it why it must endure, for survival was not simply breathing but standing as a testament that even the hunted can defy fate, even the broken can remain unbroken, and though its tongue lapped desperately at the stream, its ears stayed alert, catching every rustle, every shifting stone. And when the lions made their move, creeping closer in the tall grass, the buffalo did not run, instead it lifted its head, horns glinting in the last red light of the sun, and it stared straight into the eyes of the nearest predator, a stare that carried generations of defiance, a stare that seemed to tell them that if they wanted this life, they would have to pay dearly for it. And for a moment, the lions faltered, their unity cracking beneath the weight of the buffalo's will, and in that hesitation, the creature turned, not to flee but to step further into the shadows of the land, letting the night embrace it, moving toward survival one step at a time, until the darkness swallowed its figure, leaving only the sound of hooves fading into the distance. And though the lions lingered, their hunger gnawed at them louder than their pride, and slowly, one by one, they turned back, leaving the buffalo alone in the wilderness, still scarred, still bleeding, yet undefeated. And as the stars spread across the sky like ancient fires above, the buffalo continued. Not for glory, not for triumph, but for the simple, unbreakable will to live another day, to stand when the world expected it to fall, to remind even the shadows that some spirits cannot be extinguished, no matter how many times death comes near. And with every breath drawn under the endless sky, the buffalo's story deepened, its existence becoming more than survival, becoming a legend written not in words but in the dust, in the blood, in the eternal strength of its march. And as the night carried on and silence returned to the plain, the buffalo walked forward, carrying with it the echo of life's most stubborn truth, that the will to endure is itself a victory greater than any battle. The buffalo's body carried the scars of countless battles and the weight of unspoken memories, its massive frame moving with a deliberate heaviness that spoke of both strength and exhaustion, yet it refused to surrender to the wilderness that had tested it time and time again, the sun rising and setting upon its horns like a crown of survival, each step forward echoing the unbreakable truth that it was not just living but enduring, carving its existence into the earth with every print of its hooves, while around it the landscape breathed with an unsettling mixture of silence and hidden threat, lions lingering at the edge of the horizon, their golden eyes always searching, waiting for the perfect moment when weakness might reveal itself. But the buffalo knew better than to show weakness. It stood like a stone amidst the shifting winds, drinking water slowly at streams, lifting its head high to sniff danger before lowering its mouth to the rippling surface, its hide glistening with sweat, blood, and dust that had fused into a rough armor, one that told a story of resistance written not in words but in wounds, every scar on its body a line in an epic tale that no human hand could ever write. For the buffalo's struggle was not just against predators but against fate itself. Its battle was not merely for survival but for dignity, for the primal right to exist in a world that seemed determined to erase it, and in the stillness of the long nights beneath the unblinking stars, the buffalo would stand alone in the grasslands, its breath visible in the cold air, a reminder that it had not yet fallen, not yet given in to the circle that claimed all living things. And sometimes the wind would whistle across its torn ears like the voices of those it had once defended, other buffalo that had fallen in hunts, in ambushes, in desperate struggles that painted the earth red, and though it no longer had a herd, their spirits seemed to follow it, shadows that lent strength to its tired legs, invisible allies that whispered endurance into its heart. And still the lions came, drawn by hunger and the scent of frailty, circling at dusk and retreating at dawn, always probing, always testing, leaping forward sometimes only to be met by the sharp thrust of horns that caught flesh and sent them yowling back into the darkness. And each time the buffalo survived, though each encounter left a piece of its energy behind, drained into the soil, as if the land itself demanded a toll for every victory. Yet even with trembling muscles and aching joints, the buffalo pressed on, chewing the dry grass with slow determination, swallowing life even when it tasted of dust, because to give up would mean surrendering not just to the lions but to the void itself. And so it kept moving, its hooves cracking the dry earth, its massive lungs working like bellows, its gaze always fixed far beyond the immediate danger, as though it sought something greater than survival, something eternal. And maybe it did, for in its solitude, the buffalo had become something more than prey or predator. It had become a symbol of endurance, a creature that carried the memory of ancient plains, when herds thundered like storms and the sky trembled with the vibration of countless hooves, and though that time was gone, the buffalo carried it in its blood, in the marrow of its bones, refusing to let history vanish. And perhaps that was why the lions never fully conquered it, why even as they struck and tore, the buffalo rose again and again, stumbling, bleeding, but still rising, because within it burned something the lions could never extinguish, a fire older than hunger, older than fear, a fire that was not just survival but defiance. And as the night fell again, the buffalo stood under the cold moonlight, its breath ragged, its body heavy, but its eyes alive with that unyielding spark, as if to say to the universe itself, I am still here, and I will not fall, not tonight, not yet. And with that silent vow it lowered its head, its horns glinting in the pale light, and braced itself once more for the coming storm, because it knew the lions would not stop, and neither would it, and thus the endless war between them stretched into another night, a battle without end, fought in silence, written in scars, and remembered only by the earth itself. The buffalo moved through the endless expanse of the prairie with a heavy, deliberate step, each hooffall a drumbeat against the cracked earth, a rhythm that seemed to echo the heart of the land itself, carrying within its massive body the weight of countless battles and the wisdom of ages, the scars on its hide telling stories of nights survived, of predators repelled, of hunger endured and thirst conquered. Yet even as it pressed forward, muscles trembling with fatigue, lungs burning with effort, there was in its gaze a profound awareness, an intelligence that seemed to comprehend not only the immediate dangers of lions, snakes, and the harsh elements, but the larger patterns of life and survival in this unforgiving wilderness. For the buffalo was no longer simply an animal moving through space, it had become a living testament to resilience, a guardian of the plains, a symbol of endurance in a world that tested every being to its limits. And as the sun rose, casting its pale gold across the grasslands, the buffalo raised its head to drink from a distant stream, the cool water lapping against its tongue and nostrils, each swallow a small relief, each pause a moment of reflection amidst the ceaseless movement of existence. And though it was alone, the land itself seemed to acknowledge its presence, the wind whispering through the tall grasses like a chorus singing songs of recognition, the earth firm beneath its hooves, and even the distant mountains watched in silent reverence, for this was a creature that had faced death and emerged not only alive but unbroken. And as it drank, the memory of the zebra it had once saved from the constricting coils of a venomous snake surfaced, the faint recollection of the panic in the zebra's eyes, the hiss of the serpent, the immense effort required to pry the animal free. And in that memory, the buffalo felt not only a sense of accomplishment but a deep, resonant understanding of connection, of the threads that tied all living beings to one another. For even in a world where every creature seemed locked in a constant battle for survival, moments of compassion and courage created ripples that extended far beyond the immediate, shaping the landscape of life in ways invisible to the casual observer. And so the buffalo continued, step by step, nostrils flaring to sense danger, ears twitching at the faintest rustle, muscles coiled for either flight or defense. And as the day wore on, the heat beating down upon its broad back, it stumbled occasionally, each movement a negotiation between strength and exhaustion. Yet it refused to yield, driven not only by instinct but by the living memory of all it had endured and all it had witnessed. And in the distance, the faint glimmer of a herd appeared, a flicker of movement among the waving grass, and the buffalo felt the pull of its lineage, the call of companionship long denied. And though the lions might still linger, still wait for the slightest falter, the buffalo moved with a renewed purpose, each step measured, calculated, a master of its own destiny. And as it approached the edge of the hidden waterway that nourished the plains, the faint scent of predators mingled with the aroma of grass and wildflowers, a reminder that life here was always precarious, yet within that precariousness lay beauty. And the buffalo, sensing the rhythms of the land, of the unseen streams beneath the soil, of the wind carrying news of distant rainfall, moved with a grace that belied its size, a silent acknowledgement of the interconnectedness of all things, the way life persisted even in the harshest conditions. And as it walked, the shadows of clouds passed over the plains, altering the light and temperature in subtle ways, each change an opportunity or a threat. And the buffalo adapted instinctively, shifting its path, adjusting its pace, listening to the language of the wind and the whisper of the grass, reading the signs invisible to most. eyes, and as evening descended, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet, the buffalo reached a secluded grove where the earth was soft and the water plentiful, a hidden oasis in the vastness of the plains, and there it paused, lowering its head to drink deeply, muscles relaxing slightly with each swallow, eyes closing in a fleeting moment of relief, yet even in that moment, the buffalo remained vigilant, aware that survival demanded constant awareness, that even rest could not be fully surrendered to when danger was always nearby, and in the quiet of the grove, with the sun dipping behind distant ridges, the buffalo lifted its head once more, nostrils flaring, eyes scanning, ears twitching, a sentinel of the wild, embodying the persistence of life itself, for every scar, every wound, every narrow escape had forged within it an unbreakable spirit, a consciousness that extended beyond mere instinct, a recognition that its existence carried meaning far beyond the self, that acts of courage, compassion, and endurance resonated across the web of life, and as the night deepened, stars spilling across the sky like scattered fire, the buffalo settled near the water, muscles taut yet body still, breathing slowly and evenly, eyes reflecting the cosmos, aware of the eternal cycles of predator and prey, of storm and drought, of birth and death, yet steadfast in its refusal to be diminished by any of them. And as the wind rose, carrying the scent of distant fires and rain, the buffalo lifted its massive head, letting out a deep, resonant bellow that seemed to roll across the plains like thunder, a proclamation of life, of survival, of defiance against all odds, and that sound, echoing in the night, was more than a call to any nearby herd, more than a warning to predators. It was a declaration to the world that the buffalo remained, that it embodied the unyielding will to endure, to protect, to witness, and to live, and as the hours passed, the buffalo's vigilance never waned, its consciousness intertwined with the land, the water, the air, the unseen threads that held the ecosystem together, and it understood, in ways beyond simple comprehension, that its actions, its courage, its endurance, its moments of compassion toward other creatures, resonated far beyond the immediate, shaping the world quietly yet profoundly. And when the first light of dawn began to illuminate the horizon, painting the sky in delicate pastels, the buffalo rose once more, muscles quivering but strong, and stepped forward, hooves sinking slightly into the damp earth, the water glinting beneath it like molten silver, and with each forward motion, each careful placement of its immense weight, it carried with it not only the history of its species, the lessons of countless battles, and the memory of those it had saved, but also the promise that its story, the story of survival, of compassion, of intelligence, of resilience, would endure, inspiring, teaching, and reminding all who witnessed it that life, in its purest, wildest form, was something to cherish, something to defend, something to honor. And as the day unfolded across the sprawling plains, the buffalo continued, step by step, breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat, an eternal witness, a living monument to the power of perseverance, the value of courage, and the deep, unbreakable bonds that connect all creatures within the tapestry of life. The buffalo moved with an almost meditative determination across the vast expanse of the prairie, each massive step pressing into the dry, sun-baked earth with a sound like distant thunder, the rhythmic crunch of its hooves mingling with the whisper of the wind through the tall grasses, carrying scents of distant rain and wildflowers, of predators that might lurk in hidden shadows, of water that shimmered somewhere beyond the horizon. And as it walked, the memories of its battles and rescues, of the zebra entwined in the deadly coils of a snake, of the nights it had stood alone against hunger and fear, coursed through its mind as if each moment of survival were stitched into its very consciousness, a tapestry of pain, endurance, and fleeting triumph. And though its muscles ached and its joints protested with every step, the buffalo's resolve never faltered, its heart pumping like a drum in the silent rhythm of the plains, each breath a testament to life endured and strength preserved, for it had learned in countless confrontations that surrender was not an option, that to give in to fatigue or despair was to erase the stories of generations written into its blood and marrow, and so it pressed forward, nostrils flaring, ears twitching at the slightest sound, eyes scanning the horizon with an intelligence that surpassed mere instinct, sensing patterns in the grasses, the distant movements of predators, the subtle shifts in the wind, and as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the rolling hills and shallow gullies, the buffalo found itself at the edge of a small ravine where the earth had been scorched by recent lightning strikes, the smell of burnt wood mingling with the musky scent of its own sweat and the lingering aroma of vegetation. Yet even here, in this desolate patch of the prairie, the buffalo did not hesitate, moving carefully across the uneven terrain, balancing its enormous weight with an uncanny precision, every motion a careful negotiation between caution and the pressing need to reach water, and as it descended into the ravine, it noticed the faint signs of another creature, a small set of tracks, partially obscured by dust and wind, the imprint of hooves that suggested a young zebra or perhaps a calf wandering alone, a fragment of life in a landscape that demanded constant vigilance, and the buffalo, remembering its past act of rescue, felt a subtle pull in its chest, a recognition that life beyond its own existence held meaning, that the preservation of others was intertwined with the preservation of itself, and so it slowed, lowering its massive head to examine the tracks, sniffing the air for signs of danger, and then, with a careful deliberation born of years surviving the wilderness, it followed the trail, each step weighted with both caution and purpose, hooves sinking into soft earth near the stream that trickled through the ravine, the sound of water a faint promise of relief and nourishment, and as the buffalo drew closer to the source, it caught sight of movement, a small zebra calf, caught in a patch of thorny brush, trembling, eyes wide with panic, and the faint coil of a snake slithered menacingly near its legs, venom glinting in the sunlight, ready to strike, and the buffalo's instincts surged, adrenaline coursing through its massive frame, muscles tensing, horns lowering slightly, a deep rumble resonating from its chest that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself, warning the serpent to pause, to reconsider, yet the snake did not flee, poised in aggression, and the buffalo took a step forward, deliberately, carefully, each motion conveying power and protection, its gaze fixed on the vulnerable calf, and the air between predator, prey, and protector hung taut with tension, the silence of the ravine pressing down, broken only by the distant call of a hawk and the soft trickle of water, and then the buffalo moved with a sudden, calculated force, nudging the brush with its broad head, dislodging thorns and clearing a path, while simultaneously positioning itself between the snake and the calf, lowering its massive body in a shield that radiated unyielding strength, the snake recoiling slightly at the vibration of the ground, and the buffalo let out another deep bellow, a warning and a reassurance all at once, a sound that seemed to resonate in the very bones of the young zebra, calming its trembling as it sensed the presence of a protector, and for a moment, time itself seemed to hold its breath, the predator frozen, the prey waiting, the buffalo steadfast in its guardianship, and with slow, precise movements, it nudged the calf gently with its snout, encouraging it to move along the safer path it had cleared, guiding it step by step toward the stream, the snake retreating finally under the authority of the buffalo's sheer presence. And as the calf scrambled toward the water, the buffalo lowered its head again to drink. Muscles quivering with exertion but heart swelling with the quiet triumph of the act, for it understood that survival was not solitary, that the protection of others strengthened the very fabric of life, that in lifting another, it elevated itself, and as the sun sank lower in the sky, painting the ravine in warm amber hues, the buffalo remained beside the calf, vigilant, ensuring that no threat emerged from the shadows, until finally, the zebra took a cautious sip of the water, eyes flicking to the buffalo, recognition and gratitude dawning in its gaze, and the buffalo, sensing the completion of its task, stepped back slightly, still watchful but allowing the calf its own moment of relief, and as the evening deepened into night, the stars emerging in brilliant clusters overhead, the buffalo and the calf rested near the stream, the wind carrying the scent of grass and distant rain, the rustle of leaves a lullaby across the plains, and the buffalo, though exhausted, felt a quiet contentment, knowing it had once more fulfilled the ancient duty written into its being, that in protecting life it had affirmed the sacred bond that connects all creatures, that the plains themselves had witnessed its courage, and that this story, this single act of compassion, would ripple through the ecosystem in ways unseen, strengthening the threads of survival, resilience, and interconnection that wove together predator, prey, and protector, and as night enveloped them, the buffalo lifted its head, nostrils flaring at the scents carried by the wind, ears twitching at distant movement, but within its chest, a steady rhythm of pride and resolve beat, a quiet knowledge that it had, once again, ensured that life would continue, that courage and compassion, even in the raw, untamed wilderness, held power beyond measure, and with that understanding, the buffalo settled beside the stream, massive body relaxing into the soft earth, eyes reflecting the myriad stars above, every scar and every muscle carrying the stories of past triumphs and trials, and as it drifted into a light, vigilant rest, the plains around it seemed to sigh, the wind whispering through the grasses in reverence, the water glinting softly in the moonlight, and in that moment, the buffalo was not merely a creature of flesh and bone, but an enduring symbol of life, courage, and the profound, unspoken bonds that tie all living beings together. And the night stretched on, silent but alive, the buffalo and the young zebra resting in the fragile peace of survival, the endless plains holding their vigil,